We are talking The Last Voyage of the Demeter. This one is directed by Andre Overdahl and stars Corey Hawkins, Liam Cunningham and David Dalshmalchian. And is based, of course, of the chapter, at least, of the Bram Stoker's Dracula, as you probably already know by now. Now, this one was actually denied a UK cinema release. It was due to be released here, but that was cancelled. So that was the end of that. So obviously it's had to have been what's now on sort of kind of a VOD. So this didn't do particularly well at the box office in the States where it was released. And I have a couple of ideas why that might be. To give you a brief plot synopsis beforehand, it essentially focuses, as I say, on one chapter of the novel Bram Stoker's Dracula, where Dracula is being transported via the ocean from, I think it's Hungary, but he's obviously coming from Transylvania, to England, and he ultimately is kind of feasting on the crew of the Demeter. So why didn't this do particularly well at the box office in the States? So I think, to be honest with you, for me, I mean, I was thinking about this in my own point of view. I obviously like horror films as hence the channel, but even I was a little bit kind of hesitant to watch this one because I know the story. I mean, it's a chapter of a very, very well-known book. So you know where this story is going. You know exactly what's going to happen. And to be honest with you, even if you look at the Dracula novel as a whole, I don't think that is one of the more memorable chapters of the book, to be honest. So I just don't know if it was all that appealing. I mean, I think Dracula as well, for young audiences, is a little bit of an older property now that I don't think younger audiences are that interested in. Obviously, we had the Nicolas Cage Renfield movie that also didn't do particularly well. Also, obviously based on Dracula this year as well. So I just don't know if Dracula is a little old-fashioned, perhaps, for sort of young audiences who maybe feel like, you know, they've kind of, it's a little bit too far removed from these kind of older IPs. And even if you are kind of a fan of it, like I've said, you feel like you know exactly what's going to happen. So I personally feel that's possibly some of the reasons why. It doesn't have a particularly any big names in it. So, you know, that's my assessment as to why people may have been a little bit more hesitant to kind of go on it. But let's talk about what I think, now I've seen it, what I liked about it. So I really like Liam Cunningham in this movie. He was one of my favourite characters in Game of Thrones as Davos, and he's playing very much like Davos, a salty sea captain who's kind of wise and you know, kind of like a good person and stuff like that. So I really enjoyed him. It's almost like Davos Part 2 in a way. So I like Liam Cunningham. I liked some of the other casts as well. I thought that, you know, the cast here did a fairly good job in regards to the acting. I like the kind of gothic ambience that this film has. Obviously, being a Dracula film, really, it's primarily set at night with a few kind of, you know, dialogue scenes during the day. But it obviously has this kind of like this 19th century kind of like old-timey ship and sort of costuming and it's kind of very much, it feels a little bit like a Hammer horror in some ways, with the kind of all the mist and all of this kind of coming over the ship and things like that. So it has this kind of like gothic ambience, which I think really does, you know, make it feel like a little bit of a throwback movie to a certain degree. It's a very different take on the Dracula mythos. Here he is more bestial. It's really before he becomes the well, I guess it's because he hasn't fed, you know, he's more of just a kind of a monster here, rather than he takes his more human persona, as we see in later chapters of obviously the kind of the Dracula novel. And before that, here where he's kind of in transit, he is just more of a kind of a creature and things like that. So it gives you this more ferocious kind of side of it. The designs were influenced by the, obviously, Count Orlok designs from Nosferatu, which of course was essentially an early mockbuster of Dracula. But I quite like the design of of kind of the Dracula creature here. I thought it was quite cool, quite kind of scary looking, and obviously has that sort of that Nosferatu kind of feel to it, which was pretty good. There's a couple of kind of like well put together sequences where we see kind of like Dracula kind of very quickly or slightly out of view or somewhat obscured, which gives him this kind of like otherworldly kind of feel, because rarely until we get more towards the end of the film do we get a really kind of good look at him. So it almost feels like he's sort of this kind of otherworldly presence, which is only kind of like viewable in kind of very short snippets and things like that. So I think adds to the kind of the mythos that this kind of like Dracula creates, and this movie is trying to to counter, to have this kind of this sort of spooky atmosphere. So that was all sort of pretty good. And it leaves it somewhat of a difference with the kind of the Dracula novel. There are a couple of kind of like changes here in regards to how it kind of leaves off, I would say, without kind of spoiling anything for you. There are a kind of a few changes, so it's not a sort of there is stuff here that I suppose you could watch that you would say, oh, it's a little different to the way I was expecting. It was not exactly like I thought it would be. I don't know whether if it was that would have made people go, because obviously you just think, oh yeah, I know this, I know what happens. We've even seen that BBC drama that was like a year or so ago that actually had a whole episode based on the kind of the voyage of the Demeter and things like that. So but there's a few elements here which I feel were a little kind of like added a little extra to it, so to speak. What I think didn't work. I gotta be honest with you, I thought some of the CGI here was a little ropey. It's clearly a green screen when we see the kind of the sequences, especially at night. It's very noticeable, where we kind of see obviously on the ship's deck, and you see this kind of green screen kind of like sea in the background and stuff like that. I don't think the CGI looks particularly good on the actual Dracula character either at times. He's not too outlandish. I don't know why that couldn't have been done more practically, to be honest. I think maybe people just rely on CG a little bit too much these days. I don't know if... there's certain sequences where he's flying around. Obviously it needs to be CGI, I suppose. But there's certain sequences where we have a close-up, and I just don't... I think it could have been done practically. I think the VFX, the CGI, the Dracula monster, it sometimes doesn't look particularly good. As I've said, even though this does have a few tweaks, you ultimately know how the kind of like the bones of the story is going to end up with this one. So there's no real surprises here. I have to say as well, there are a few logic issues for me in this film. For example, again, I'm going to try and avoid spoilers here, but our crew of our ship are noticing, people are getting killed off one by one, and they're sort of searching around and can't find anything. But they kind of search the crates right at the end. It's the last thing they kind of search. Even though, like, when the crates were getting loaded, people were saying, "Oh, this dragon logo means bad luck. It's bad omens and things like that." And then there's even a sequence where we have one of the crate gets kind of broken, and there's this female kind of like victim who kind of falls out and is like covered in dirt, and they're like, oh, maybe we should check these crates that this girl clearly kind of fell out of and things like that. But no, we won't bother with that. We'll kind of search everywhere else, but not those crates. And that was a little silly. I think the kind of how the kind of the vampires are turning, because Dracula turns a couple here, is a little inconsistent. There's the rules apply for one but not the other in certain kind of like situations. So there's a few kind of like just kind of like logic issues that didn't quite make sense to me, and I think as they're trying to flesh out this kind of particular chapter of this novel, they've created a few kind of like plot holes and things. So just to name a couple there that I just don't know really worked. This ship's not that big, and then we can't find Dracula's sleeping place during the day. I don't know. When they clearly see what happens to one of these things during the day. Yeah, there's some silly... I just don't know if it completely worked on a script level, to be honest. It needed to have a little bit of a tight script, if you ask me. It's a well put together movie on, I think, on a visual level. Even though I don't think some of the CGI is particularly good. But it still, I think, it makes it for somewhat of an effective kind of thriller. I don't know if it really hit all the right spots, to be honest, but I would say I'll give it a 6 out of 10. It was pretty good, but I don't think it was really excellent or even great. It was pretty good, so it's a 6 out of 10 for me. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.